Hi there, Martin Popoff back again with Overkill Rewind. This is the show where you pick the top 5 albums of a specific year. This year we're doing 1979. Strange year. I mean, this is a year where the record industry was sort of in some contraction. Jimmy Carter is president. McDonald's introduces the Happy Meal for the first time. Pope John Paul II goes on a big tour. Some sad news as well. There's a trampling at a Who concert in Cincinnati. 11 people died at that. Sid Vicious is found dead this year as well. In the world of hard rock, we don't have new wave of British heavy metal yet. Aerosmith's going through trouble. Kiss has gone poppy. All sorts of crazy stuff's happening. Heavy music, period, is not in vogue in 1979. So let's see what you guys thought of 1979. So coming in at number 5 is Thin Lizzy, Black Rose. Thin Lizzy, great band. They started essentially 1969, 1970, so there are many, many records in at this point. This is a great album. It's essentially my second favorite Thin Lizzy album. It's got the usual variety of ballads, experimental stuff, some pretty heavy stuff. They had a little bit of a hit with Waiting for an Alibi off of this, but there's some great heavy songs on here like Got to Give It Up, Get Out of Here. It's got the big epic title track, Black Rose, where they go through a lot of Celtic music, melodies, folk songs, kind of a big history of Irish history. But essentially, it's just a good, solid Thin Lizzy album that has about the same kind of product mix as Jailbreak, Johnny the Fox, Bad Reputation, Chinatown. Gary Moore is back in the band. That's kind of an interesting thing about this record. Great production on it, and just a good, solid Thin Lizzy record. It came in at number 81 on the Billboard charts, but it never went gold. I mean, Thin Lizzy only has one gold album in the States, and that's Jailbreak. So the reception at the time is essentially, they haven't really grown what they're doing in America at all, but basically everybody thought this was a really good Thin Lizzy album. So what would I give it out of 5 skulls? I would give Thin Lizzy Black Rose 5 skulls out of 5 skulls. Number 4 in our top albums of 1979 is Judas Priest, Hellbent for Leather. Now, Judas Priest, great band, truly a heavy metal band. I mean, Priest and Sabbath are kind of the mainstays of the 70s, inventing and, evolving heavy metal, especially Judas Priest, starting with Sad Wings of Destiny. This is my favorite Judas Priest album. There's a little bit of a controversy with this choice because it came out as Killing Machine in the UK in October of '78, and then it came out in North America as Hellbent for Leather. The label didn't like the title Killing Machine. They thought it was too violent. In January of 1979, and they added a cover of Fleetwood Mac's Green Manalishi with the two-pronged crown. Super heavy song. But I love this record. I find it a cusp record, which is essentially a record that takes the best from the past and moves it a little bit into the future. It's got that scientific complexity of a stained glass and a Sin After Sin, but it's also got sort of the aggression and the beefier production qualities as we move forward. So I think it's just got the perfect balance of what you want out of Judas Priest. Hellbent for Leather is on here, Delivering the Goods, Evening Star is on here, Running Wild. It's just a well-paced album with a lot of cool varieties, and all of it pretty much heavy metal. Evil Fantasies, Killing Machine, a couple of slow ones. So yeah, just a really cool collection of songs, just great songwriting. Nice, heavy Judas Priest album. Now, what would I give it out of 5 skulls? Again, I'm being a little predictable here. Yeah, I love this record so much. My favorite Judas Priest album, 5 skulls out of 5 skulls. All right, so number 3 in our top heavy metal albums of 1979 is Scorpions' Lovedrive. Well, let me say this first. I mean, here they are coming in at number 3, but there's a problem with that Judas Priest. As I mentioned, some people, I'm sure, thought it was a 78 album, and some people thought it was a 79 album. And we don't allow live albums on Overkill Rewind, and a lot of people were voting for Judas Priest Unleashed in the East, which is a great, great album. So Judas Priest kind of had their vote split 3 ways. So yeah, would it toggle back and forth with Scorpions' Lovedrive? I don't know. So Scorpions has been going since the early 70s. They had the Uli John Roth era, which had a little bit of what they call the krautrock sound in there. So it's a mix of heavy metal. He loves Hendrix, so there's a Hendrix obsession there, a little bit of krautrock. So they're a little bit murky and obscure. But coming into Lovedrive, they get Matthias Jabs in the band. Now he kind of brings an American sensibility, even though he's German, to the band. They start sort of shifting their sound a little bit into just being a little more chunkier and straightforward. Also in the band at this time, kind of as a part-time member, temporary member, it's a little complicated, Michael Schenker, Rudolf Schenker's brother. But yeah, great record. It actually went gold in the States, which is quite surprising because there's no real hits on it. But yeah, Loving You Sunday Morning is on here, Another Piece of Meat, Coast to Coast, sort of their most famous instrumental. The title track, Lovedrive, great heavy song. Can't Get Enough, big heavy song. Great production on this record. Like I say, very straightforward, way less obscure than the last record, Taken by Force. And then they're going to progress down that road with Blackout and then into Love at First Sting. So yeah, it was a sort of a coming out party record for them in this strange year, but it didn't go gold instantly. It took Blackout and the success of Love at First Sting to make this a big record. So what do I think of Lovedrive? I love it. I like it a lot, and I suppose I do love it. But the songs are just they hold back a little bit in terms of great songwriting. So I think what I'm going to give this one is 4 skulls out of 5 skulls, just to give us some variety here. All right, coming in at number 2 of our top albums of 1979 is ACDC, Highway to Hell. Now, ACDC needs no introduction, so I'll try to be brief. They've been around for a long time, of course. This is their, 4th, 5th, 6th album, something like that. There's a live album in between as well. But this is the record that essentially is the big coming out party for ACDC. It's produced by Mutt Lange, so they're going away from the Vanda Young production. You know, the last album, Power Age, is my favorite ACDC album. I consider it a little southern rocky. The album before that, Let There Be Rock, is the one where they really beefed up the guitars, super electric guitars. So this is a record that kind of splits the difference and also improves on the songwriting. I mean, we get such classics as Highway to Hell, of course, but my favorite, probably 3 ACDC songs of all time are on here. If You Want Blood, Walk All Over You, and Touch Too Much. I also love Beating Around the Bush as well. Shot Down in Flames is great. The title track is great. There's a lot of good stuff on this. Night Prowler, this sort of bluesy ballad at the very end of the album. So yeah, this is a super good, accessible album. People loved it. There was a lot of excitement around ACDC, and lo and behold, I mean, this didn't happen right away, but this record went 7 times platinum in the States. It's by far the biggest record on this list. Now, I noticed in some of the comments of the voting that some people were a little unsure whether it was even okay to vote for ACDC. Are they truly a heavy metal band? You know, back then they certainly were considered a heavy metal band. They were right in the thick of the whole thing. Sadly, this is the last studio album we're going to get with Bon Scott on vocals, who dies in a car, freezing to death after a night of drinking, and he's going to be replaced by Brian Johnson. So, great album, though. Everybody loves Highway to Hell. I love Highway to Hell. It's my second favorite AC/DC album. So, in terms of a skull rating, I am going to give this 5 skulls out of 5 skulls. All right, so here we are, number 1, the greatest heavy metal album of 1979, as voted by you, our very wise viewers, is Motorhead, Overkill. Now, Motorhead, great band. Here we are on their 2nd album. In a way, it's their 3rd because they had sort of an aborted album that later came out called On Parole for United Artists. Even the 1st album is kind of dodgy. It's not that great. They're out on Chiswick at this point. It's just the self-titled, but they get into Overkill, and things improve immeasurably. They're on Braun's Records now with Jerry Braun. They've got a color cover, the Snaggletooth cover, amazing. I remember getting this album as a new release in Spokane, Washington, and pulling that out and seeing that. And it's comical, but I remember leaping up in the air and almost hitting my head on a big wooden beam when I saw this thing. So this was Motorhead in color for the first time. Great, great record. It far and away got the most votes. We're going to see as we move into the honorable mention, Motorhead got a lot of vote splitting with Bomber, because basically this album came out in early 1979. They did not have an album in 78, and then Bomber came out in late 79. But it's got such great songs as I'll Be Your Sister and Tear You Down and Damage Case, Limb from Limb. Overkill is cited. When we did Metal Evolution, this was kind of a cool thing about Overkill that we talked about there with Filthy Animal Taylor, the drummer. It's the first song that has double bass drum all the way through. So it's kind of the predecessor to Ace of Spades. And frankly, you know, I basically think this album is as good as Bomber, is as good as Ace of Spades. They're all very similar records. So yeah, that's Motorhead. They're off to the races here. Here's another record that did not go gold in the States. I mean, barely. Motorhead made no dent in the States. This is actually one of the very heaviest albums of the entire 70s. That's something we kind of get into. I mean, there's ACDC, whatever, Let There Be Rock, there's the Sex Pistols, there's the Motorhead albums. But this is truly one of the heaviest albums of 1978. And we are about heavy metal here, so people really recognize that yes, this is clearly a heavy metal album to vote for. So, enough said. What is my skull rating on this? I'm going to go with 4.5 skulls out of 5 skulls. Okay, so here's the honorable mentions. Like we always do, we tell you the 5 runner-ups to the 5 that won. So first runner-up was Motorhead Bomber. As I said, you know, this got a lot of vote splitting with Overkill. This is a band that put out 2 records in 1979, pretty incredible, but they didn't have one in 78. Great album. Bomber is always looked at as sort of the redheaded stepchild of Overkill, I suppose, because it's just a little bit more obscure. Some even say it's got even a little bit of poppiness to it. Maybe the production isn't as heavy on this one, but I think it's pretty much a similar album. It's a very charming record. I always loved it. Number 2 runner-up, so number 7 in the list, is Van Halen 2. This is Van Halen's second album. They called it 2, of course, and it's a pretty cool record. It's heavy, it's murky, but this marked a big change in sound for Van Halen. Van Halen basically made their very most professional album of their entire career with that first Van Halen album in 1978. But on this record, they discover the Brown sound, which is essentially a combination of what Alex does and what Eddie does. It's a very murky, cool, obscure production quality to it. It had some kind of mellow hits on this with Women in Love, but it's got some heavy stuff like DOA and Light Up the Sky. It's got the cover of You're No Good. Kind of a weird Dark Horse Van Halen album, but yeah, everybody loves Van Halen, and like I say, there's not a lot to pick from in 1979. So number 8 in our list, so our third runner-up, is Saxon by Saxon. So here we see it's kind of odd to have somebody start off the new wave of British heavy metal in 1979, but that's what happened. Saxon has this album cover come out with this dodgy illustration of like this Viking warrior on the cover. It really looks like a new wave of British heavy metal album, but it's 1979, and they're kind of first to the post. It's out on this weird little French label called Career, and it's not that great a record. Saxon really hasn't discovered their sound yet. They really get into a heavy metal, bikerish, we love heavy metal sound with the classic Wheels of Steel album, which comes out in 1980. This one's still got a little bit of progginess, a little bit of 70s-ness to it. It's a little dated, but it does have a little bit of, proto-new wave of British heavy metal on it as well. So it's cool to see Saxon getting some votes. Next runner-up, so number 9 in the list, fourth runner-up, is Rainbow Down to Earth. I love this record. I argue with people all the time. It's my favorite Rainbow album of all time. Pretty interesting. They get a new singer in. Ronnie James Dio is now gone. They bring in Graham Bonnet, who goes on to other great heavy metal classics with Michael Schenker Group and Alcatraz. But this is a really cool kind of commercial album, but it's actually pretty heavy too. I mean, it's got commercial stuff like Since You've Been Gone and All Night Long, but it's got some really cool heavy metal classics like Eyes of the World and my favorite Rainbow song of all time, Lost in Hollywood. Roger Glover's in the band, so he's producing. Cozy Powell is still their drummer, and he does a great performance on this album, especially Lost in Hollywood. Just go listen to that song, I beg of you. It's amazing. My favorite Rainbow album of all time. Very cool to see them getting some votes in here. After this, Graham Bonnet is gone. We're moving on to Joe Lynn Turner, and that's a whole nother thing altogether. All right, our last runner-up, number 10 on the list, so number 5 in the runners-up, is Riot with Narita. Now, Riot is a New York band. They're one of the few bands making heavy metal in this transition period. Like I say, Van Halen kind of falls into this weird gap between, the mid-70s and then the explosion of metal in 1980. But Riot is in there. They put out a debut called Rock City. Their classic is probably Fire Down Under, which is the next one, 1981. But this is a pretty cool heavy metal album as well. Guy Speranza's in there as vocalist. Sadly, he would die later. Even their second vocalist, Rhett Ford, Forrester would die as well. This is a really clean, cool, heavy metal album, great production, lot of variety, very accessible. It's one of the great mysteries of all time why Riot was not a bigger band. So yeah, good to see them getting some recognition here. That was Riot Narita. So yeah, this is my favorite part of Overkill Rewind because I get to say, hey, why didn't you vote for these guys? Or why didn't these guys get enough votes? So some of my favorite albums of 1979 that did not make the list, Gillan Mr. Universe. I love Gillan. They're one of my favorite bands of all time. So they're in there with a super heavy, cool album. Gillan is kind of like the punk rock version of Deep Purple. They got keyboards in there as well, almost Doorsy keyboards. Very bizarre band. I love Aerosmith, Night in the Ruts. I would have hoped that would have gotten more votes. I think that's a cool dark horse Aerosmith album. Ted Nugent's State of Shock. Oddly, I have to argue with people about this all the time as well, but it's my favorite Ted Nugent album of all time. Gamma, with their first album. This is Ronnie Montrose's post-Montrose band. He called it Gamma. They had Gamma 1, 2, 3, and 4. They're kind of like a futuristic heavy metal but accessible band at the same time, so they're kind of scientific and cool. And Accept has an album out, kind of a cool, heavy Scorpions, loose-bolted German heavy metal album comes out of this time. And one that's not exactly heavy metal that I just love, The Damned, Machine Gun Etiquette, one of my favorite punk albums of all time. I love The Damned, and so they put out this raging, super heavy, dirty record in 1979. So those were my honorable mentions. Yeah, thanks for joining us here on Overkill Rewind for 1979 again. We're going to be doing more of these, so get your votes in when we send out the call for votes. And until next time, see you later, and go listen to some 1979.